Recording.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 5th webinar of the Singers Laboratory webinar series. My name's Saide and I'll be your host today. Today we're going to talk about vocal health and vocal technique. Before we move on, I thought to give you a little order of the presentation so you know what to expect in the next 30 to 40 minutes. We're going to start with a little mindfulness exercise just so that we could get into a specific headspace and focus and get the best out of this session. I'll then talk a little bit about vocal health and go much more broadly than just the health of our throat and vocal cords, and we're gonna explore different aspects of our lives that we could address health for. I will then talk about vocal technique, what's good technique and how to achieve it. I'll give you some concrete examples specifically for breath control and supporting the voice. And at the end, we'll have some question period. Let me just see a message in the chat. Perfect. So every rehearsal or lesson or session, I try to start with a little bit of mindfulness exercise. And if you don't know what mindfulness is, it's basically a series of exercises that could help you slow down your thoughts, slow down the heart rate. So oftentimes people experience maybe physical relaxation or mental calm. And the goal is to basically develop a non-reactive mindset. And again, to be able to be in a headspace so that we could actually be focused, whether in a rehearsal or in a performance. I've listed a few things that a lot of people experience after doing mindfulness. And it's not a quick thing. Some people feel it quickly the first time they do a mindfulness exercise. Some others need to do it for months and years before they get to these goals. So you may feel physical relaxation and mental calm, as I mentioned. Some people over time experience maybe more emotional stability, better ability to focus, ability to accept and let go of things, and also just to feel less anxious. A lot of musicians and performers use these exercises. I have a whole webinar on mindfulness and different exercises, and if you're interested to learn a little bit more about that, I can send you the link, but it's also on my website. So I thought we could start by quickly doing a guided meditation together. All you have to do is to focus on your breathing and listen to my voice. You don't need to do anything else. So if it feels good for you, you can sit, stand, lay down, it doesn't really matter. Let the eyes close if it feels safe and comfortable. And let's tune into the body. Let's just focus on our breathing in and out. Reflect on the quality of the breath. Is it shallow or is it deep? Is it quick or is it slow? In your mind, count 1 on the inhale and 2 on the exhale, just to bring focus to our practice. Allow the breath to travel deep within the body. We want a full breath, something that feels relaxing. Let's do a quick body scan. Bring the attention to the feet and to the ankles. You can roll the ankles.
Meditation.
With every exhalation, see if you can soften that body part a little bit more. Let's now think about the legs. If you're seated, you can think about melting into the chair. We don't want to be holding any muscles. We don't want to be accumulating any tension. Let's focus on the motion of the belly as we breathe. The entire girdle of the core could expand and extend. The belly, the tailbone, pelvic floor. Even the back muscles. Can we feel the subtle motion of expansion and extension as we breathe? It's so small that we may not even feel it, but let's at least welcome it. We use the back muscles for singing, so we can wake them up now. Make sure the chest is open, but soft. We don't want to be holding ourselves up with force. The neck is tall, shoulders relax down. Let's now bring the attention to the face. Is there any areas of tension in our face? We oftentimes do hold a lot of tension in our face. Around the eyes maybe. Forehead. So you can give your face a little massage if it feels good. Gently massage the forehead and the cheeks. At the same time, go back to your breathing. Deep, full breathing. Let the jaw go and relax the tongue in the mouth. Now breathe and be aware of the entirety of the body in space. Let's reflect on how the body and mind feels now compared to 2 minutes ago. With this focused mindset, we can blink our eyes open and continue. Perfect. So that was just a quick example of a guided meditation to relax the body and the mind. So now we're ready. So for vocal health, I want us to think holistically, and I also wanted to mention that vocal health and vocal technique, both of them are such expansive subjects. I could have an entire webinar just on every element that I'm going to mention in this session. But I wanted to pick some of the most important things so that the session is still short and sweet for everybody and everybody could take something away from it. But if there is anything you'd like to engage with further or you'd like to explore more, feel free to email me and I'll be able to guide you to the right resources. But for vocal health, we don't want to always just think about the health of our throat or the health of our body. There is so much more that goes into being a healthy singer. So let's reflect on a few questions, and I want you to either write your answers in the chat or raise your hand. What's involved in the art of singing and lifestyle of a singer? How can we think of vocal health holistically? What elements could help or hinder a performance? And what aspects of our lives could we bring health to? Could we address health in? You can type in maybe some of the most obvious ones, and then we'll go beyond those as well. Oops. Drink water for hydration. Yes, that's a good one. Relaxation, mental health and stress, very important one. Practicing, yes. We can't ever substitute anything with practice, right? Emotional state, very good. Very good. What else would a singer need for well-being? Let go of tension. Sleep, yes. Diet, very good. You're covering almost everything. Proper posture. All of these are great ideas. Taking care of the voice with water, maybe steam, rest, warm up. Yeah, that's a good one. Warm up daily. Good diaphragm support. And I'm going to talk about that as well. Perfect. Thanks so much. Now, I've included a list here. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. This list, of course, could go on and on, but I wanted to just focus on some of the more important ones. Mental health, bodily health, emotional or spiritual health, Our diet is important, exercising, proper rest and sleep, as somebody mentioned, being aware of allergies or sensitivities, community and sense of belonging. This is something that I wanted to make sure to include, and lifestyle. So we'll go from some of the more obvious ones to just some of the least obvious ones. But for everything that I mentioned, I have here something that could help with just addressing health in that area. So for mental and emotional stability, we could use mindfulness exercises. I'm not saying that mindfulness could solve mental health issues, but if you're experiencing anxiety, if there is a lot of jitters and stress, mindfulness could really, really help. It could also help with focus, of course. For body, we need to exercise. Sometimes we forget that singing is such an active physical thing that we're doing. We rely heavily on our bodies. And oftentimes we forget that as part of that, we need to actually be active. And that could mean very different things to different people, what levels of activity or what kinds of exercises you do. But it's important that we make room for exercise. Diet. Again, what we put in our diet, excuse me, is very important. What we put in our bodies is very important. We've always heard the message of adding more fruits and veggies to our diet. But I wanted to include a few things here that you may want to jot down for next time that you have a rehearsal or a performance. So maybe you could explore a little bit and see which ones affect you the most. People are affected differently by these before the performance. I personally avoid heavy or starchy food before performances. You may also want to consider avoiding spicy food or dairy or any kind of thing that has a drying effect like caffeine and alcohol. I also wanted to include that maybe reflect on how much of your diet is actually ultra processed foods and not natural foods. Keep a journal, and anytime you go to a rehearsal or a performance, when you're performing in it, keep a note of how you felt at the rehearsal or at the performance. And then track your steps back to see what happened that day. What did you eat that day? What happened the days prior? And see if you could identify whether any of these elements show up in your performance days and if any of these elements affect you. And make sure you just avoid them. Rest is very important. As artists, we might be working weekends and evenings, or you might have a very heavy rehearsal schedule before concerts. Rest is something that's not oftentimes advocated, whether in training or in the industry, but we need to kind of fight for it, for that 8 hours of sleep. We need many different forms of rest. It's not just a sleep. I would recommend taking time away from people, from phone, from news, so that you could really have time to allow the music, spend time with the music, allow the music to settle into the body. Spend time in nature and allow time for periods of inactivity. Non-doing is something that our society is not really okay with. But let's explore what non-doing might mean to you and how it is okay to not be productive all the time. So for social health, I included community and a sense of belonging. It's so important that we're part of groups. Sometimes we may feel artistic groups might come with a level of toxicity because there's a lot of competitiveness there. So join other groups outside of arts, make friends, do other hobbies. That element of social belonging is really, really important for singers. And finally, I wanted to address lifestyle. Some of us do art as a full-time thing, some of us do it on the side as a part-time thing, but always try to reflect on this idea of work and life balance. We don't want to be absorbed in anything so much that it ends up we end up hating it. Always set priorities and see if everything you do is in line with those priorities. So I always mention, for example, if your priority is just to sing for fun and not to learn music theory and vocal technique and all of those things, maybe you don't need 3 lessons a week. So always go back to your priorities. Listen to your body when you're tired. This is an important one. Rehearsals are long, tech weeks are long. Make sure that you always listen to your body if you need rest. I included proactive thinking in avoiding sickness. That's something that we can't always avoid, sicknesses. But for example, right now, anywhere I go, I always wear a mask because I know if I get COVID or if I get a cold, I'm just not going to be able to practice, sing. I'm going to have to cancel performances, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm trying to be a little bit proactive about it, and that's a good mindset to have. And finally, create simple routines that you can follow daily, whether for work, for practice, mindfulness, singing, so that it doesn't end up feeling like work. I also have a whole webinar on importance of routine and plan creation for performing. What should you do before, during, and after a performance? And we actually think we don't have control over a lot of things, but we have way more control and power than we think. By this method, we can eliminate a lot of the randomness. So you might feel that a lot of things that were out of your control are now actually in your control. You're eliminating a lot of things and actually moving more towards a really confident, good performance. I'll include this link as well in the email that I'll send you. So just to go a little bit even beyond the more obvious things, sometimes we might have allergies, sometimes we might not know we have sensitivities. It's important to always keep it in the back of your mind when something bothered you, and always write it in a journal. Think about things that maybe are no longer serving you in your life, whether those are relationships, places, anything that you think is no longer serving you, and maybe you would like to reconsider the inclusion of that in your life. By journaling, you can really make note of all of these things and have a chance to observe and reflect on everything over time, so that you could identify elements that hinder your performance or identify elements that help your performance. And we are very different from person to person. So you need to kind of create your own portfolio of what works or doesn't work for you. I see that somebody says that does vegan diet, is it okay? Honestly, it is okay as long as you're okay with it and your doctor is okay with it. I'm not a physician, so I wouldn't be able to comment on that. But we always want to keep a healthy diet, something that's nutritious, something that will give us our bodies everything that we need. So if you're vegan, you may want to consider talking to your family physician just to make sure that you're getting everything that you need, whether it's vitamins or supplements and things like that. But that's, at the end of the day, I wouldn't be able to comment on that. It's totally your choice. Let me see if there are any other questions. Perfect. So let's move on to vocal technique a little bit. On the right, you see a picture of a person with many different organs and body parts that are involved in the act of singing. So I was looking at this. This is a very common kind of picture in a lot of books and different courses, and I realized it's missing so much information. These are not the only things involved in singing. This is only maybe a third of it. So because of that, I wanted to just address something that's really important and oftentimes not included in books or graphs for that matter. So for singing, we need two different types of knowledge. We have tacit knowledge and facet knowledge. So tacit knowledge is the implicit knowledge, something that we learn through lived experience. Singing, a lot of singing is like that. We need to experience support in our bodies. That's tacit knowledge. We need to make sure that we know how to control different muscles and how to control the breath to get to a specific phrase. That's all implicit knowledge. In contrast to that, we have facet or explicit knowledge. That's when we understand things intellectually. Now, I'm realizing that in my training and also later on when I started teaching, I realized that a lot of people would say, I understand this concept intellectually. I understand, for example, the vocal mechanism. But when it comes to performance, I cannot translate that knowledge over to actually doing it. It's because we haven't moved from facet to tacit knowledge. So it's important that we want to have both in singing. And later on, I have a few different exercises for you to experience the implicit knowledge exclusively. So there are so many things involved in vocal technique. Actually, maybe I should let you write a few things in the chat for me. What do you think is good vocal technique? What are some of the most important elements of supporting the voice? How does a good singer sound like, look like in their lifestyle? And I'm gonna keep an eye on the chat. What is vocal technique? Diaphragmic breathing, yes, using your diaphragm. Breath control. Yes, that's a good one. Breath control. Posture, yes. What other things have you heard from teachers or conductors? Stand tall. Shape of the mouth, yes. That's very detailed. Placement of tongue. Some of these subjects are also, I need to mention that different teachers and conductors think differently of these things, right? People have different opinions, and sometimes it could be very controversial. Using air for singing, those are all very good answers. So I've created a list here. Again, this is just a few examples. This list goes on forever, okay? So posture is really important. When it comes to posture, it's better to think about it simpler than to make it more complex. So think of opposite forces anytime it's about posture. What I mean by that is that the upper body should feel a sensation of lifting. Everything's kind of expanding upwards, while we feel that we're grounding and we're rooting down. So it's the opposite forces of lifting up and grounding down. Think about what good posture means in your body. Of course, we want the shoulders to be relaxed. It's important that we don't narrow the chest or the back. If we overextend the chest, a lot of times that narrows the back, so then we can't use our back muscles, right? We need to ensure that the posture is comfortable enough so that the entire girdle of the core could expand when we breathe. We need to make sure knees are soft so that the pelvic floor isn't tensing up. We could use the pelvic floor for support. So think of it more in simpler terms for posture. I would also say that it might serve you to not think very specifically about, oh, the position of the tongue and the jaw and those things. It's really important to work with a teacher. Oh, I think somebody is writing something on my screen. It's important that you know what good posture basically means in your body. I don't know how to remove that. Let me see if I can remove the red line. There you go. Perfect. So let's move on to breath control. So a lot of you mentioned breath. It's very important for a singer to know how to regulate the stream of air, because oftentimes we're dealing with very long phrases or phrases that go very low and very high. Those are not natural for human beings. So we need to learn how to control specific muscles so that they could regulate this stream of air in a way that it's economical and good for singing. Again, you need to work with a teacher, specifically a singer, to be able to help you over time to learn breath management. But I also have some exercises for you. A few of you mentioned diaphragm. This is something that is oftentimes said in rehearsals and classes, but I wanted to make sure that I include this. It's so important to know that diaphragm is a reactionary muscle. So, for example, I cannot tell you to control your heartbeat. Okay, heartbeat is another reactionary one. But you could do things to then affect the heart rate to go up or down. Like you can exercise, so the heart rate goes up. The same thing for diaphragm. You cannot directly control it. If I tell you control your diaphragm, where is that even? How do you do it? But you can do other things to affect the diaphragm to stay low for the breath. For example, we learn to breathe low. We learn to activate low abdominal muscles, our legs, lower back, so that they could then affect the diaphragm to stay low. So it's a reactionary muscle. I would stay away from terms like control diaphragm or diaphragm breathing. Breathing is just breathing, right? We want deep breathing. The quality of breath is something we want to describe. Support. Now, a lot of times when conductors ask you to support your voice, what does that mean? What do you do next? When you hear support, what is your reflex? What should you do? The This is another controversial one, but one that also includes a lot of confusion around it. Keep the diaphragm down. But how do you keep the diaphragm down? Deeper breath. Okay, that's closer. Yes. Your sternum. That's part of support. What else? Have control over air. How could you have control over air? Upright posture. Avoid letting air to rush out. Yes, very close. So for support, the first thing I want to hear for support is activity and energization of core muscles. That's the important thing about support. So when somebody tells you to support your voice, the first thing to do is to think, I want activity and energy in my core, entire girdle of the core, low abdominal muscles, tailbone, pelvic floor. It even includes legs and back. For singing, we want to use bigger muscles to support the voice. So that's what it means, energization and activity of core muscles. When that happens, then you can control the air. Posture, of course, help with this. In vocal technique, we also spend a lot of time in lessons and rehearsals finding the balance between relaxation and do tension. What parts should we relax? What parts should we activate? Tension is not all bad. Do tension is good because that means that's the bare minimum energy we need to get something done, right? If we were totally relaxed, we'd be on the floor. So we always are negotiating the equilibrium between relaxation and tension. That's something that's also taking years for singers to learn. I included 3 things that are explicit knowledge, facet knowledge. When you understand the material intellectually, when you study the score, and when you do research. So if you learn the music theory behind a song, if you learn the rhythm, the words, those are all more implicit knowledge. So I wanted to make sure to talk about this taboo concept of tension. A lot of times when we find areas of tension, there might be a sense of shame associated with it in our rehearsals because we've been told to get rid of tension here and there so much. So our first reaction is to maybe feel frustrated, is to want to get rid of it immediately. Tension is something that even professional singers feel is just part of being a human. We could then learn things to get rid of tension, like mindfulness, to soften some muscles. We could exercise. Over time, we could learn which muscles to relax and which ones to use instead, the bigger muscles, so that the rest of our body could relax, like the upper body. So the first step I would say is to just accept that there is tension. That alone will be one of the most important pathways into not suffer and not get so frustrated about it. One important thing that we get tension for is our own negative self-talk. So take note of how you talk to yourself when you feel tension or when you feel like you didn't sound good on a note or you made a mistake somewhere. What is the self-talk that you're giving yourself subconsciously? Become more aware of it and see if you could turn it, reframe it, and turn it into something more positive. So here are now a bunch of exercises that I'm going to give you so you could practice anywhere to, I think somebody's not muted. Perfect. To increase your breath control and your sense of support by really feeling it, living it, so the tacit knowledge element. So the first one is the square breathing or box breathing. Probably many of you are familiar with it. Imagine a square. It has 4 sides. For each side, we're going to do an action. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold. That's all you're going to do. You can decide, okay, I'm going to do 4 counts of each. This is used for relaxation, for alleviating anxiety, but it also can help with lung capacity. You could experiment with different parts of the breathing mechanism. The good thing is you don't need a practice room for this. You could do this anywhere. So let's try the square breathing together. 5 counts for each. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and hold 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So practice this. The hold parts are the most difficult parts because we don't want to tense up when you hold. It's just the simple stopping of the air for a few seconds. So practice this in the car, or when you don't feel good about singing, or when you're sick. This would still allow you to develop your breath management. The second exercise is just a simple inhale-exhale exercise, but the goal is to exhale much longer than you inhale. This is going to kick in your parasympathetic system to relax, but also this is training you to control the air as you're exhaling, just like singing. You're going to experiment with the muscles that are responsible for that control, and you also need to manage the pace of the breath. So if you say, I'm going to inhale for 4 and exhale for 8, by the end of the 8th count, you need to be out of breath without gasping, without going blue. If you're exhaling for 12 counts, the pace of exhalation needs to be different, right? If it's for 2 counts, then it needs to be a very fast pace. So you're also experimenting with all these different pacing issues. Let's try that. Inhale for 4, exhale for 8. Breathe. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and breath. So a lot of you might end up with more breath at the end of 8. So that means you would need to exhale faster. You're gonna practice this to the point that you get to inhale for 1 count, exhale for 12, because that's what's happening in music for us. In music, we have 1 second to breathe, and then we have this long phrase we have to sing, right? So you need to learn a type of breath that is quick, but it also can travel deep. We don't want a chest breath. We don't want to gasp, because that's not a good quality of breath, right? This is also something you can definitely need to practice with a teacher. The third exercise, I call it eternal breath, but it was first introduced to me by my dear professor at University of Ottawa. So this is only focused on inhalation. If you take a big breath, a lot of times we feel like, oh, there is no more room for me to breathe in. But that's not true. The reason why we feel like there is no more air can come in, is because of tension. Our chest is tense, our throat is tense. This eternal breath exercise allows you to inhale slowly. Anytime you feel a pinch or any area that's tensing, you need to soften and then continue inhaling. Over time, you will realize that you can inhale for much, much longer than you previously thought. So let's try it. Get rid of the air and start inhaling very slowly. The entirety of the body fills up with air. If you feel pinching, soften it and continue inhaling. Relax the back, shoulders, throat, and chest. The air could continue to travel very deep into the back. When you feel like there is no more room to breathe, you can exhale. But you see, this exercise will really help you see, I have so much more breath than I thought before. So if you're running out of breath quickly in music, it's because of something else, not oftentimes for lung capacity. So it's probably because of tension. So our breathing, we want it to be a supportive kind of breath. The breath is the thing that activates the support before we sing. So when we breathe, we need to make sure it travels deep within the body so it targets the core muscles. If your breath is so shallow that it's only going to reach the chest, that's not deep enough to reach the core muscles. So it's not a supportive breath. Make sure it travels so deep that it could activate the core muscles. I also wanted to encourage you to move away from singing just when you're sitting or standing up. Experiment singing in all different forms. A lot of times opera singers need to sing and breathe when they're lying down on the floor or they're hanging from something, right? So lay down on the floor and breathe. Lean back and breathe. Lean forward and breathe. See how your breathing changes. Leaning forward and singing, a lot of times actually my students tell me, oh, my back opens up and I can access back muscles for breathing. So try it in different ways and see what you explore. A lot of singing is kind of detective work, right? And experimentation. Finally, you could connect breath with movements. For example, a yoga exercise is cat and cow, where you can attach breath to movement and at the same time do a stretch, relax the body, but focus on the breath. In cat and cow, you're usually on your knees and hands, but you could do it in any other form, even seated. So if you open up your chest and look up, you can inhale, and then round the back, look down and exhale. So you see that with the cat and cow, this inhalation and exhalation is associated with the movement. So you could do that as well. These are just 6 exercises. There is way more. If you're looking for more breath control exercises, reach out to me. But I think these 6 would provide a good start. Now we're going to get into support exercises. What can you do to increase the support of your voice actively? And what's the purpose of these exercises? So again, as I mentioned, I realized that at the beginning of my own training, I would understand what support means, but I couldn't support the voice in action. Then later on, years later, I started teaching. My students could understand it intellectually, they couldn't do it in action. That meant there was this gap between explicit knowledge and implicit knowledge. To mitigate that, I decided to come up with a series of poses that would put you in a position where you have to have your core engaged, or else you cannot be in that pose. So the pose activates your core already. Then when you are in the pose, start breathing and start singing. So that's how I would mitigate that gap, basically, so that my students could feel core as a lived experience. They could feel supported voice in experience, in actually doing it. So there's a series of poses here. The goal is to get to know how to use the abdominal muscles. You practice in these poses enough times that over time you no longer need to be in this pose to access the core muscles. You can just access it quickly. But to start, we need to start in these poses. The first one I call the zombie pose. So you could do it seated or standing. Sit tall or stand tall. Gently start lifting your arms in front of you and feel the abdominal wall engage. The arms cannot be up unless your abdominal wall is engaged, right? With that activity in the core, see if you could breathe deep. So we don't want to get tense in these poses. Breathe deep while experiencing the energization of the core. So you're kind of getting to that balance of relaxation and tension. After you're breathing in, maybe start doing some light warm-ups in this pose. A lot of students will feel shocked at how different their breathing feels when the core is activated. And the sound that comes out is also completely different. So zombie pose is an easy pose to start with. We're gonna get a little bit more difficult. The second one I'll call the wall pose. So in this picture, this man is pushing a wall away from him. You could push against the wall or a counter or a big piano, anything that doesn't move, anything that's safe, basically. The act of pushing activates your arm, activates your back, activates your core. You cannot be pushing against something unless the core is activated, right? In this particular picture, the man has put one foot in front of the other in a lunge position. So it might be a stronger pose, the back is extended, the pelvic floor is extended. When you're in this pose, so even now, if you're sitting at a desk, you could start pushing the desk away from you and feel how the core kind of kicks in, right? The core is energized. Breathe deep, make sure it's not tense, and then you could sing in it. Let's get a little bit more difficult. The third one is called the goddess pose. This is not something I invented. This is a yoga pose. It's called goddess. It's very, very active. If you can also do this seated or standing. It's very important that your safety is number one. You modify as needed. So if you're standing or seated, the feet are hip width apart or more, depending on what you feel comfortable with. The feet turn out. When you're ready, you gently bend the knees without leaning forward. So our back needs to be very straight. You do not need to go as deep as the woman in this picture. So bend the knees until you feel the core muscles activate and the pelvic floor relaxed. Breathe in this pose. If you want something extra, like this lady here, you can have cactus arms. The arms reach up, the elbows bend to open the chest. So you can get into this pose, breathe and sing. This is a difficult one, so make sure that you don't stay in it too long. Your legs will start shaking, but that's normal. This also, the purpose of this is again to activate your core before you sing. And finally, the chair pose, also a yoga pose. This one, feet are together, but if it's too hard, you can have the feet a little bit apart. We bend the knees as though we're sitting in an imaginary chair. That's why it's called the chair pose. But we lean forward and extend our arms so that our back is completely straight and extended. The arms reach forward, the tailbone extends backwards. There is no arch in the back. This one is also extremely active. This one you will immediately feel the core engaged. Breathe in it, sing in it, and then maybe reach out to me and let me know how this experimentation goes, which one of these poses you like the most, and how they have affected your singing. Somebody says, did you say pelvic floor relaxed in Goddess? Yes. I know it seems like a counterintuitive thing, but yes, pelvic floor relaxed and expanded so that you could really breathe deep. So remember that, so again, when I say relaxation, that doesn't mean relaxation doesn't always mean it's so relaxed that we just fall down, right? There is a level of activity, but it's not tense in the pelvic floor. So remember that it will take time before muscles start to react to any of these exercises. Think of an athlete. An athlete cannot just jump and do an Olympics game. It takes years before they could do it. Singing is also a physical act. It takes years before we can master singing. It's a lifelong journey. Sometimes when it comes to musicianship, we think that we should immediately get it and immediately do an amazing job. But that's not the case. The journey is the most important thing that we need to stay focused on. Bring patience and compassion to yourself and everybody you work with. So now let's think of the signs of a well-rounded singer. Who is a well-rounded singer? Based on all these things that I mentioned, there's quite a lot to process here. Tell me a few signs of a well-rounded singer. Joyful. Oh, that's a good one. Yes. Being joyful is a sign of a good singer. Yes. What else? What did you take away from this webinar? Give me one important thing. Grounded in the body. Yes. In tune with the body. There's a lot of awareness about body, right, that we sometimes forget. Whole body experience. Yes. It's not just about our throat. What was the most important thing that you learned from this session? Awareness of sensitivities and allergies. Yes, something that we might not always think about. Relaxed and activated muscles. Yes, the balance between them. The strong support with ability to vary vocal technique as desired. Yes, so there's one vocal technique, right? What differentiates different ways of singing is the style of singing, not the technique. There's one technique. Good breathing, good support, all of these things that go into that. Then we change the style of singing to then sing jazz or classical or folk. Whole mind experience. Love learning about the tacit versus facet knowledge. Perfect, those are all great answers. So I've included a few things here. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. Good voice, good vocal, ability to work with your voice, ability to perform good technique, textual understanding, poetry, knowing how to analyze characters. I also have a webinar about this. I will link you to it. Interpretation, stamina, grit, resilience, mental performance skills. I will also link you to a webinar that I had specifically on mental performance skills. How can you work with your mind so that if there is a barrier in your mind that's stopping you from doing things, you can eliminate that. A lot of times our ability is actually limited just because of maybe our mindset. So after this webinar, you're going to get an email from me with a bunch of resources in it, a bunch of links. I will also include the topics for the next webinars if you'd like to register. As an attendee of the webinars, you're eligible for a 30-minute trial lesson with me at a pay what you can rate. So if you'd like to set that up, let me know. You can follow me on social media. And finally, remember that there is no magical quick fix to good singing. It's all about practice and thinking of all these different elements.